The NFC West kinda sucks this year, with 3 teams sitting at 4-4 and 1 team sitting at 3-4. This is a division with no team that is over 500. So in today's video, I want to talk about the NFC West. I want to go through every single team, and then briefly at the end, we're going to talk about the division as a whole. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button, but let's go ahead and hop right into it. So as I mentioned, we are going to go through each individual team first, and then towards the end, we'll talk about the division as a whole and what the future may present for these teams. And we are going to begin with who is actually leading the division right now, and surprisingly, through the first 8 weeks, it is the Arizona Cardinals. Now, so far, the year has been really weird for the Arizona Cardinals. Yes, they're 4-4, but they actually have a net point differential of -27. The only reason why they're winning this division is because, well, the rest of the division isn't playing particularly good, and they're 2-0 within the division. Statistically speaking, the Arizona Cardinals are far from impressive, but I would say that they have definitely taken a big step forward from last year. Offensively, they're averaging 22.3 points per game, which ranks them at number 18th in the NFL. They average 338.5 yards per game, which puts them at number 12, and they're averaging 2.4 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 18 as well. Defensively speaking, that's definitely not the bright spot of this team. They're not particularly playing well, but I also think that they've definitely improved from last year. On the defensive end, they're giving up an average of 25.6 points per game, which puts them at number 24. They're giving up 376.5 yards per game, which puts them at number 27. And they're giving up around 2.8 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 22. Again, none of those statistics are really great, but I would say that there are small improvements from what we saw last year. I would say the biggest highlight thus far for this Arizona Cardinals team has been the steady improvement of Kyler Murray. He has looked really awesome to start the year up so far. On the year, he has 1,638 passing yards with 11 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. And in a lot of these games where they're going up against some really good opponents, it is typically Kyler Murray who is keeping them in these games and allowing them to make some comebacks against some really good teams. Thus far, through the first 8 weeks, they've actually had a really tough schedule going up against teams like the Bills, the Lions, the Commanders, the LA Rams, the San Francisco 49ers, the Green Bay Packers, the Dolphins with a healthy Tua Tagovailoa, and the LA Chargers. And well, they've actually held their own in a lot of these games. Against the Buffalo Bills, which is a lot of people's favorites to win the AFC, they only lost by 6 points. Against the Detroit Lions, who I personally think is the best team in the NFL right now, they only lost by 7 and held that Lions offense to 20. They actually beat the San Francisco 49ers, and they actually beat the LA Chargers, and they beat the Dolphins led by Tua. So I want to get one thing straight. I do not think this Cardinals team is a championship contender. Hell, I even have a hard time saying that they're even playoff contenders. But through the first 8 weeks, they are leading the division, and they're definitely playing some good football, especially within the last 2 weeks. So there's definitely a shot that they could win the division. I'm going to say right now they probably won't, but hey, shout out to the Arizona Cardinals. They've been playing a lot better football from what we saw last year. We'll have to wait and see if they can hold on to this and if they can keep this up, because I'm a little bit skeptical, but I'm also very proud of the improvements from Kyler Murray and this Cardinals team. Then at number 2, we actually have the San Francisco 49ers. Now, thus far through the Niners season, they're 4-4 and haven't played particularly well so far. For the year, they have a net point differential of +28, but the reason why they're technically number 2 is that they're only 1-2 within the division. Statistically speaking, the San Francisco 49ers actually haven't particularly looked that bad. On the offensive side of things, they're averaging 26.3 points per game, which puts them at number 8. They're averaging 412.4 yards per game, which puts them at number 2. And they're averaging 2.6 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 13. And defensively speaking, where everyone thinks that they suck, they actually haven't particularly been terrible. They're giving up 22.8 points per game, which puts them at number 17. They're allowing 314.8 yards per game, which puts them at number 10. And they're giving up 2.6 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 17. For San Francisco, a lot of things have gone wrong this year, primarily with injuries. Guys like Christian McCaffrey have missed the entire season. Brandon Ayuk is now out for the entire season. And they've had a plethora of other injuries on the defensive side. And of course, still, there's a lot of guys offensively who have also missed time that I didn't speak about. And so far this year, it's just been really hit and miss with this Niners team. They're going to have a really impressive victory here, and then they're going to look like an abysmal team the next week. The biggest thing that has really been hurting this Niners team has been their red zone offense. For whatever reason, it's been horrendously bad. Their red zone scoring percentage for touchdowns is only 48.57%, which puts them at number 27 in the NFL. This team is also not converting on fourth downs when they do try to go for it. They currently sit at number 25 on fourth down conversion rates. This team is running the football a lot despite not having Christian McCaffrey, and they're actually having success. It's just not translating when they get into the red zone. So far this year, Brock Purdy is actually having a fine season, but I would say these last few weeks haven't been the prettiest. So far this year, he has 2,101 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. He did have a game against the Chiefs where he threw 3 interceptions, and he's also had a couple other stinkers like he had against the Cardinals where he also had 2 interceptions in that game. But he's also had plenty of impressive performances. I thought he played well against the Dallas Cowboys this most recent week. For San Francisco, I do think that this is the best team in the division still. You don't just go to the Super Bowl and have a couple injuries and then all of a sudden you suck. No, this is a team that is still full of talent and will get healthier as the year goes on, at least we all kind of hope. And I would say if you're a Niners fan, the biggest thing that you want to see improve on this team is, well, number 1, just getting healthy. Number 2, improving in your red zone offense. And number 3, just stop making stupid mistakes. I think once those things start to happen, they'll be able to rack up some wins and probably take over the division later in the season. However, moving on to number 3, this is the third team in the division, the Seattle Seahawks. This team was at one point leading the division, but they haven't played too well the past couple weeks, so therefore they've moved down to number 3. On the year, they have a net point differential of -5, and they rank number 3 because they're 0-1 in the division. Statistically speaking, they're performing at a solid level offensively, but not so much on the defensive side. On the offensive end, they're scoring 23.8 points per game, which puts them at number 13. They're racking up 351.4 yards per game, which puts them at number 9, and they're putting up 2.8 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 11. But on the defensive side of things, it's really not too pretty. They're giving up 24.4 points per game, which puts them at number 19. They're giving up 356.5 yards per game, which puts them at number 22, and they're allowing 2.8 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 22 as well. And for a team that is led by a defensive mind who was brought in this season to fix that defense, I would say the defense has definitely been underperforming. Now, I will give them a little bit of some slack here. It's a new defensive coordinator. It's a new system. They're still trying to get the pieces in there. And their first round pick, Byron Murphy, who was looking like a superstar, has been out the past couple weeks, so that's definitely hurt the defense. But now a lot of people always like to direct the blame of teams' failures and teams' lack of success on the quarterback. They always want to blame the quarterback for why the team isn't performing at a high enough level. And I don't know. I don't really believe that it's all Geno Smith's fault. Do I think he could play better? Yes, 1,000%. But I also think that he's had a couple of really impressive performances. And I would say even in some losses, I thought he played the best that he could. On the year, he's put up 2,197 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And for a year where the offensive line has been playing terribly, the receiving core hasn't been particularly great this year outside of DK Metcalf, and the defense has also underperformed, I'll say that Geno Smith has done a fine job. Definitely not a great job, not a top 10 level job, but he's done enough to, in my opinion, keep the starting position and obviously be the starting quarterback of this team moving forward. Seattle's season has been very particularly weird for whatever reason. They're going to go out there and have a really bad loss one week and then a very impressive win the next week. To start the year off, things were a little bit slow for this team. They had small wins over teams like Denver and the Patriots, and they had a dominant win against the Dolphins. But since that 3-0 start, they have not looked like the same team since then, and that's primarily been because they've actually went up against better competition. Against the Lions, they put up a valiant effort, but they obviously lost to the Detroit Lions by 13. Then they had a stinker against the New York Giants, in my opinion, a pretty inexcusable loss for this team. And then you had that 12-point loss to the Niners, who again, I think that was probably the Niners' best performance of the season. And then oddly enough, after that Niners game, you have a really good Falcons team on your schedule, and you beat them by 20. And then the following week, you lose to the Buffalo Bills by 21. So I don't really know what to think of the Seahawks team. I think on one hand, they have good players and some good talent, but I think on the other hand, they're not performing at a high enough level to win a lot of these games. I do think Seattle has a chance to win the division, but I don't think it's the greatest chance because I do think San Francisco and even the LA Rams, who we'll talk about next, could potentially win this division, and we'll talk about that in a second, though. But let's go ahead and move on to the last team in this division, and that is, of course, the LA Rams. Now, when you talk about the LA Rams, it's very important to add the context of what they've been missing this year. Obviously, the retirement of Aaron Donald has really hurt that defense, especially on the defensive line. But on the offensive end, no Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua for the majority of the season. But when those guys have been healthy, the team has looked drastically better. So far this year, they are 3-4. They're the only team thus far in the division that has had their bye week. I think San Francisco is on bye this week, so that's good for them. They're 1-1 in the division and have a chance to improve upon that this upcoming week against the Seattle Seahawks. Statistically speaking, this team is far from impressive, but again, when you add in the context of who they've been missing, it definitely does make the stats look a little bit better. On the offensive end, they're scoring 20.6 points per game, which puts them at number 23. They're averaging 323.6 yards per game, which puts them at number 20, and they're scoring 2.4 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 17. And on the defensive side, they're giving up 24.9 points per game, which puts them at number 22. They're allowing 351 yards per game, which puts them at number 21, and they're allowing 2.7 touchdowns per game, which puts them at number 21 as well. Again, when you add into the context of what this team has been missing injury-wise and retirement-wise, it is of course pretty obvious that this team is not necessarily performing at the highest level because they just don't have the guys who can do it. So far this year, Matthew Stafford hasn't looked particularly good, but again, without Cooper Kupp, without Puka Nacua, it's definitely been very hard for him to be the typical Matthew Stafford that we know him to be. On the year, he has 1,671 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, and those statistics don't look terrible until you add in the context that he had 4 of those touchdowns in one game, so in the rest of those games, he only had like 3 touchdowns. I don't believe that Stafford has been playing terrible football, but obviously without the guys that he wants to get the ball to, it's been very difficult. But I do think he could have been performing better. I don't think he's been playing at a very high level, but we'll have to wait and see with these guys coming back healthy if they can be the team that we know them to be. I would say the Rams' most impressive games so far this year have been their 2 games where they've been the most healthy team, and that was in week 1 where they went to overtime with the Detroit Lions. They would lose that game, but I thought it was a very impressive performance from that team. And then their second most impressive game was actually in a win in this most recent week against the Minnesota Vikings, where Matthew Stafford had 4 touchdowns, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp played, and they both looked good. And yeah, this team is starting to get going again. I think for the LA Rams, it is imperative that this team can, number 1, stay healthy, but number 2, improve upon what they've done so far this year. This is a team that is only 1 game behind in the division, and they're starting to get the ball rolling a little bit. So if they can keep up on that train, I do think that this team could potentially be one of the teams that does win the division. But as I said in the intro, let's go ahead and briefly just cover the division as a whole. As I've mentioned throughout the video, I think this division will change a lot for the remainder of the season. I do believe that either San Francisco or the Rams will ultimately win the division, and I think third place will either be the Cardinals or Seattle. For all these teams, it has definitely not been the season that they thought they would have. Maybe outside of the Cardinals, I would say the Cardinals are probably pretty okay with where they're at, but everyone else is probably a little bit disappointed with where they're at currently. For San Francisco, you're coming off a Super Bowl and you're only 4-4. That's incredibly disappointing. For Seattle, you thought the defense was going to be much better, and this has not been the case so far. This team has not been good, and they're also just sitting at 4-4. And for the LA Rams, they're definitely not happy either. No Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua for a big chunk of the season, and you're 3-4. Definitely not an ideal start. But I would also say that a lot of these teams are starting to play better football in the most recent weeks, and hopefully they can improve upon anything that has been giving them issues so far this year. So for the sake of the division, is this the worst division in the entire NFL? Maybe. I will say probably not, but it's definitely up there for the conversation as to being one of the worst. We'll have to wait and see ultimately how the year plays out. But if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.